Hey there, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
We can indeed.
Hey, Paul.
Hey there. So welcome, Akhil and Noah and everyone who's tuning in live right now, and everyone who will see this taped after. My name is Paul Chenier. I'm EVP of Global Sales here at Playwire. We're here today to talk about something that I think is top of mind for everyone, which is COPPA, and specifically COPPA 2.0. First of all, I want to introduce my guests. So first of all, Akhil Bhardwaj from KidSafe. Akhil is a privacy audit specialist for KidSafe and an expert in the space. And Noah Forster, the CXO here at Playwire, also an expert in really understanding the regulations and how to be compliant for our partners. So, Akhil, we want to start right at the top. COPPA is something I think everyone in the advertising and publishing space understands and knows about, but I think there's a fair amount of confusion, right? I see it every day when I talk to advertisers and publishers, even people who are on the edge of experts, right? What is PII? What are the penalties? Who enforces it? What is the law? So why don't we start right at the top? I want anybody watching today to come into these first 5 minutes with a real deep understanding of COPPA.
Wow, you went straight for it. Thank you. Thanks, Paul. So COPPA is the federal regulation in the US, which is the Kids Online Privacy Protection Act. It's been around for a while. It originally came up in 1998, and has since then it has not been amended. So in 2024 is the first time that we're seeing a legislative amendment to the COPPA Act, and that's why this is big news. Quick preview, the Amendment Act, which is COPPA, and you're going to hear about it a lot in this call, has already passed Senate, and it's likely to come up before the House next week. So whether or not it passes the House and becomes law post presidential assent is speculative at the moment, but we will know either ways in the next 2 months. The reason there's a lot of confusion about what is COPPA is because we keep hearing these words COPPA 2.0 and 3.0 and all of these numbers that the media really brings up. And what they're really talking about is the underlying rules. So under the law, the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, regulates this space through rules that they amend from time to time. And there have, in fact, been multiple iterations of those rules that have come up. So 2000 was the first rule. It was amended in 2013. And then 2019 onwards, we've been in the process of another amendment. So that's what's being referred to in the media as COPPA 3.0. Even though COPPA 2.0 is what is currently before the House. So we have these two parallel processes that are going on together. But that is generally the regulatory landscape for kids' privacy online. Paul, if it's a good time for me to plug in answers to what you also alluded to in your question about what is PII and...
let's start there. So COPPA is the law of the land. You call it COPPA, I call it COPPA. My wife and I call it something different. But it's the law of the land. And advertisers and publishers have to be aware of it. And it deals with the collection of personally identifiable information, right? And if you do collect that information on minors, right, under the age of 13 specifically, there are massive consequences and implications. So why don't we start there? What is PII? What is consent, right? Can an advertiser or a marketer or a publisher collect information if they have got consent to do it? What does that process look like? And then really kind of like, what are the implications, right? Like, and what are some examples of companies that have been fined? And is it real? Is it a real fine? Is it a scary fine? Is it just the boogeyman coming for you? So why don't we stop there? What is PII? What are examples? You'll go from there.
So COPPA and its implications are very real. To put it into context, the last fine that's top of mind for everybody is going to be Epic Games. So Fortnite, everyone's heard of Fortnite. They were fined $520 million US just as a fine. And then there was a refund payment that was triggered by the FTC as part of the settlement with the FTC that was an additional 230 mil. So this is very real, and it is business critical for everybody in the business of engaging with children online to understand it and to be compliant with it. So it's very real. In terms of what is PII, PII is, broadly speaking, anything that can identify a human person. In this case, COPPA so far has dealt with users only up to the age of 13, so that is preteen users. But the Amendment Act, which is the bill which is before the House now, suggests that the scope for COPPA should be expanded up to users under 17. And that has significant impacts on how publishers and advertisers deal with the properties that they're advertising on or hosting ads on, particularly because there's some amount of gray area sometimes when you consider something to be child directed, but it also targets teenagers. You can get away with saying, hey, majority of our audience was teens. I will warn that that's not a great way to deal with COPPA compliance, but that is an approach that a lot of publishers have been taking in the past. That gray area significantly reduces once the teenagers, that is users up to 16, also come within the COPPA web.
Yeah, there's going to be a much bigger boat with many more people in it. So let's start with, who has to worry about COPPA compliance, right? Like what kind of publisher or what kind of advertiser needs to worry about this? I know there's is it kid directed? Are there cartoon characters? Just who needs to worry about COPPA compliance to start?
So COPPA lays this out pretty clearly. COPPA says that COPPA applies to kid-directed products, which so far has meant products that are directed to users under 13. And the FTC has over time built what is called the totality of circumstances test, where it's a pretty broad analysis of who is targeted by a product, who the actual audience of the product is, what kind of merchandise is sold offline relating to the product, how different app stores list the product, the kind of characters that are seen in the product. So as the name suggests, totality of circumstances to determine whether or not a particular product is child-directed. If you are child-directed, COPPA applies to you. That is not to say that there aren't products that have children on them, but are not exclusively directed for children. Okay. So if you are a general audience product, that's the flip side to child-directed products in the COPPA classification. If you're a general audience product, so that's like, say, if you are the New York Times. So the New York Times is meant for a general audience. Just because there also happen to be some children on it does not make it a child-directed product.
Got it. So if you've got a website or a TV show or a piece of, you're a publisher, and it's very clear that you are looking to appeal to kids, right? With the totality of circumstances, right? It's cartoony looking figures, you sell toys, you need to worry about COPPA. Worry is not the right word. You need to be aware of COPPA. Now, let's talk about PII, because this is something you mentioned to me. I always thought PII would be like maybe cookies on the browser. I don't know, maybe, like phone number, email. But you kind of opened my eyes, and PII is a lot more than that, right? Like, what is personally identifiable information?
So yes, so everything that you just mentioned is PII, certainly, but it's a lot more than that. So all sorts of persistent identifiers are part of PII, but things like voice. So a child's voice in itself is personally identifiable information. Images, videos of a child user are personally identifiable information. So any product that's collecting even, say, an image of a child, perhaps as a display image for my user ID on the product, that amounts to collection of personally identifiable information. And in order to collect that and to be able to display it to third-party users, you need verifiable parental consent.
So tell me about that, because there are definitely apps, and there's kid stars out there. Like, we've got pictures of them. What does that consent look like for a parent to say, you know what, you actually can use my kid's picture, or even a version? I mean, the one thing you said is, like, sometimes these kids push their picture into a system that makes it look cartoony. That's still PII. So what does consent look like for those parents?
So over time, so this is one of those situations where the difference between the COPPA rule and the COPPA law makes a big impact. So the COPPA law in itself does not say that parental consent must be obtained in the following manner. But the FTC came up with guidelines through the COPPA rule where they gave examples of what verifiable parental consent could look like.
Mhm.
And broadly, it's taken the form of consent where you have a consent language that's on screen, but you, at the same time, you verify that the person who is granting that consent is a parent by either collecting an a government issue ID of the person who's actually granting the consent, or tagging it with a payment. And that is, in fact, the most commonly used form of parental consent, because the FTC recognizes that credit cards or online payment information is something that resides exclusively with adults. And it is deemed so that if you are making a payment, you are receiving some sort of a statement of that in your financials, and therefore you can be assessed as an adult. So somebody who's making a payment can at the same time also grant parental consent.
Okay.
I do want to quickly plug in that we're seeing newer forms of parental consent as technology evolves as well. For example, we're now seeing video-based consent where there are services that analyze facial telemetry data to determine what is an estimated age of the person who's on screen. So a parent being on the screen along with their child can in fact verifiably grant consent for that child through this video-based messages. This is a form of parental consent that is still with the FTC for approval. So I wouldn't say that this is completely in the clear at the moment, but it is something that we expect to go through.
Okay. Ultimately, it's a very high bar, right? Which is why I would say 99% of publishers out there choose, probably wisely, right, to just not collect PII, right? They look to create a service that is kid safe, that is kid directed, that creates value for kids in the ecosystem. I mean, that's a lot of the partners we work with. Now, I just, before we get into, well, actually, let me start there. So Noah, in your role as the CXO at Playwire, a big part of what you do is to vet partners, right? To make sure we are COPPA compliant, to ensure that the campaigns that we build and deploy on behalf of our advertisers are copacetic, I think we could say. So I wanted to, just before we come back to KidSafe, I wanted to hear from you kind of what do we do to ensure that we're deploying COPPA compliant campaigns for our partners?
Absolutely. Yeah, so what Playwire does, we take it in several different tranches, actually. We're looking at the inventory itself. We're looking at the campaign setup and the technology, and then we're looking at the creatives. First and foremost, Playwire works with trusted premium web and app publishers and streaming platforms who have great content and who take kid safety seriously. We're their premier and often exclusive sales team for COPPA. And additionally, we work with our partners to ensure that the appropriate category blocks are in place so that child-directed ads only run on content that's deemed safe and appropriate for kids. Any and all sensitive categories are blocked, of course, or simply aren't present on the platform in the first place. From a kids targeted campaigns perspective, all of Playwire's technologies are COPPA compliant, right? And we work closely with KidSafe, and we do thorough auditing. They do thorough auditing of us as well for compliance. We disable all user data collection, interest-based ads, retargeting, etc. And that's kind of that technology layer. Mm-hmm. We can go in depth about campaign setup just a little bit. Playwire ensures that all deal IDs, tags, PMPs are checked and validated. In the case of programmatic private marketplace deals, we're also taking steps to connect with our advertiser partners to kind of guide them to leverage DMPs with compliant technologies to ensure that campaigns can actually scale while reaching the kids audiences that they're looking for.
Mhm.
There's more we could talk about. We'll talk about creative probably just a little bit later in the call, but there's some steps we're doing even beyond COPPA compliance, right? Just kids safety, good practices that we take with kids.
Okay. No, that's helpful. I mean, listen, there's obviously the law of the land, and the implications are significant if you don't comply. We take that very serious, and I think something you spoke to, Noah, that I think really matters here is, as marketers, as publishers of content, we have to hold ourselves to a higher, standard.
Right.
So even if you can, doesn't mean you should, right? So in addition to, ensuring we're protecting our advertising and our publisher partners, at the same time, we have to hold ourselves to that higher standard and ensure we're thinking about the audience and the content they see, right? So let's talk about it right now very quickly. We develop 70% of all of the creative for our partners. What steps do we take to make sure, even if it's not the law we're worried about, that we're developing, content for our kids that makes sense?
Sure. So as you said, 70% of the kids creative we make or that we run here at Playwire is made by Playwire Studio. That's Playwire's very own in-house creative team. Beyond just COPPA law, we're also taking steps to ensure that the ad content itself is safe and appropriate for kids. So these are things like avoiding misleading messaging or product presentation, representation, making sure that disclosures and messaging are clear and they take into account the audience's level of language skills, making it clear that making sure that the message is clear to the child or who it's targeted at where appropriate. We generally avoid using undue sales pressure in messaging, right? Instead of go buy now, it's messaging like explore more, visit the site, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a bunch of other practices we layer on top. If there's an industry rating that applies to the product, that rating label is prominently displayed. We do this for all of our kids targeted creative. And even when we're not the ones making the creative ourselves, we're looking for this. We have a manual audit process in place.
Exactly. So speaking of the audit, because I think that's very important, right? We're constantly working with partners, people who are new to the kids marketing space. And that's some of the value we provide as an expert with 17 years doing this, is letting them know that we're going to protect them, right? We're almost like an insurance policy for themselves. Which brings me, Akhil, to KidSafe. I would love to hear about the organization and what you do specifically and why you matter in this ecosystem. Not that you don't, but I know you do, but I just want to hear from you.
Thank you. So KidSafe so at KidSafe, we wear two hats. The first hat we wear is that of a consultant. As a product developer, we are your best friend to ensure that you're developing in a compliant manner in terms of privacy, security, as well as safety. So on all three of those prongs, we're going to consult with you on what best practices should you be following. And some of our clients who we call them our members because this is a membership-based program. Some of them come to us right at the beginning when they're at the developing, they're even at the storyboarding stage, and we help develop a product from that stage onwards to launch and then beyond. And then there's others who come to us with an existing product. Some of them when there's changes in the law, or sometimes when they just want to get compliant. So that's one hat that we wear, which is that of a consultant. But the hat that we wear, particularly even with Playwire, is that of a COPPA safe harbor. So the FTC, as the regulator in this space, recognizes, and this is provided for in the COPPA law, recognizes safe harbors, which means that if we have audited you and certified you at a COPPA level and you hold our seal, that means you are protected from regulatory enforcement by the FTC for privacy issues. And in case of any inadvertent issues that do happen to arise, the regulator, which is the FTC, is going to come to us as KidSafe to get an explanation for why something did or did not happen, rather than coming to you straight away with an enforcement action. And that can make a huge difference, both in terms of the financial implications of what's happening, as well as, say, publicity or unwanted attention that you may not want for your brand. So KidSafe wears those two hats.
Okay. And, I liken it a lot to like an insurance policy in that, like that, the seal is a big deal and we go through a lot to get it. And I say it's like an insurance policy because when they see that seal, they know that this company is continually committed to kid safety online, right? But in addition to that, something you mentioned is that you guys are constantly auditing, right? Because you're putting your name out there, so you are constantly doing routine audits to make sure everything that we're doing is COPPA compliant. And I think it just speaks to the depth of safeguards that we have in place, right? With the safe harbor, with KidSafe, to make sure everyone's protected. And like I say, everyone, it's all the stakeholders. It's certainly our advertising partners. It's certainly the publishers who don't want to take on a $30,000 per infraction charge. But again, it's the kids, right? It's making sure that we're protecting them online. All right, so we talked about COPPA. We talked about the implications, what Playwire does to help. We talked about KidSafe, which is obviously arguably the most important cog in the wheel in the COPPA marketplace or ecosystem. Let's talk about COPPA 2.0, 3.0, and I think it's called COPSA. It looks like it's picking up steam. It looks like it's very likely to be something marketers and publishers have to think about. Let's talk about that. So the age goes from 13 to 16 or 13 to 17?
So far it's under 13, so it goes to under 17.
Right.
Okay, so up to 16 years of age. And anybody who's got kids knows there's a big difference between a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old, or even right now between a 9 and 11-year-old at home. So are the exact same rules going to be applied to the older audience?
No, they aren't. Again, I just want to quickly say that this is not law yet.
Yeah.
So there may be changes to what comes out from the House once it does and if it does. But the bill, the way it looks right now, for the users between the ages of 13 and 16, these users are going to be given the ability to consent on their own behalf. That is, for kids, you need verifiable parental consent. But for these teenagers, they're going to be able to receive the notice and grant consent on their own behalf. So in fact, we do see this playing out slightly differently than the way that the kids marketplaces, particularly for the advertising space, have played out so far. We could in fact end up seeing a lot of publishers trying to get upfront consent from these teenage users to in fact accept some amount of advertising, which is not just contextual advertising, which is what is currently allowed by COPPA. But at the same time, there is currently a clause in COSPA which does in fact outrightly disallow retargeting of any minor, which includes users up to the age of 17. So the Senate's actually been smart about this. They preempted the fact that once you're going to allow the kids to consent for themselves, they're just going to be able to consent to retargeting more easily or fall prey to that sort of a tactic. And therefore, they've in fact strengthened the law on the side that prevents certain kinds of targeting of kids, irrespective of whether they're 13 and below or 17 and below.
Okay,
Sorry, 16 and below.
So we kind of thought about the great cookie apocalypse of a few years ago, which was people had to accept, and that was quite easy. But it sounds like the bar is not going to be quite as high as kids. No parental consent required, but it won't just be accept all, right? There will be some level of verification that you are the human being, and so it's not going to be easy. But I think your point about even those who do, a percentage certainly will consent to having their information and data used, probably in exchange for services, right? Not in exchange generally for more ads, if we're being honest. But it's still going to create a lot of problems, right, for advertisers who have relied on data to reach that tween audience to date, right? Sorry, just I have a question. How does VPPA coexist with COPPA in regards to show titles, etc.? Let's come back to that in 1 second. But just to finish this thought, so ultimately it's just going to become more arduous, or it's going to become much harder to use data to target tween audiences on the internet, in-app, right? Which is probably going to change the complexion of how a lot of advertisers approach their markets. Again, the difference between a 13-year-old and a 23-year-old, massive difference, but it will become very difficult to use data to retarget tween audiences going forward. That's kind of the output of COPPA if it does become law of the land. Is that right, Akhil?
Yes, I would agree with that, and I will say that irrespective of whether this bill does turn into law, there is going to be an update to the COPPA rule irrespective of whether it comes from the legislature or it just comes from the FTC. What I alluded to earlier, the update to the COPPA rule, which has been in the works since 2019. It's due and it's definitely going to happen. So so at the moment, the rules don't deal with, say, biometric identifiers. So facial telemetry, gait data, analysis of voice samples, all of that is becoming a lot more relevant now, given that there's been advancements in tech. So irrespective of where the updates come from, they're gonna come, and soon. Yes, there is a question of whether or not the ambit of COPPA gets expanded to users up to the age of 16, because that is a change that can only come through a legislative enactment. But either ways, the rules around COPPA are certainly going to be made more attuned to the kind of services that we're seeing online today, because the last update was in 2013 when the internet looked very different than what it looks like today.
Exactly. And I think reading between the lines, there is a lot of collection and sharing of video online of teens and tweens, and the government is looking to get ahead of it, looking to evolve, and looking to understand how that information is used, how it should be used, and continue to think about, like they did with COPPA, how do we protect our younger audiences, right? How do we make sure that this information is not used to reverse engineer their identity, to influence them, to persuade them in ways that probably are not proper. So we do have a question. The question that comes is, how does VPPA coexist with COPPA with regards to show titles, etc.? Is this an area that you're familiar with, Akhil? VPPA, Noah?
I think it's probably just slightly tangent to what we're talking about here, but what I would say is that we could probably do a fast follow on that question.
Perfect. All right, so we are just about at time. Thank you very much, Akhil. Thank you very much, Noah. I think, we spent 30 minutes talking about this. We could probably spend another 30 minutes talking about it. I think it's going to become a major topic in the next 6 to 8 months. And I think, as we talked about, the implications for marketers and publishers are significant. I wouldn't recommend waking up in 6 months and trying to adapt. I would definitely start future-proofing your business and start thinking about how you're going to adapt. And how, ultimately, like we say, how do we ensure that, advertising and content that we're creating with and for younger audiences really passes the sniff test of who we are as a society and a culture here in the US. So before I send it off, Akhil, was there anything else that you wanted to add? Any parting thoughts?
No, I do want to echo what you said right now about the fact that these changes are relevant to both the supply and demand side on the in the advertising space. If you're somebody who somebody who has a product where you're allowing advertising to kids, you need to start thinking about who your audience is right now and the kind of consents that you need to get in place to continue to be able to monetize your product. At the same time, advertisers, there's, at the end of the day, a service, say, like Playwire, is a mediator, right? And yes, you could do advertising in a DIY manner, but there's so much that's changing in the law that is evolving very quickly in these last 6 months, not just with state amendments and the new legislative changes that have been coming in state laws, but also in the federal space right now. So keeping up with that kind of pace of evolution, it certainly does help to have either safe harbor protection if you're somebody who's hosting the ads on your platform, or the protection of somebody who's developing these creatives for you, as Playwire mentioned that you guys do in-house as well.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And I'd just add that I'd encourage any brand listening who's interested in reaching kids' audiences safely and compliantly in the environments where kids are engaged. Reach out. Let us tell you more about why you should be working with Playwire.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Akhil. Thank you, Noah. Really a great topic today. So maybe we'll have a follow-up. It was a great conversation. Thank you both. And thank you, everyone who was watching at home.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks, all.